In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green hills and wide-open skies, there lived a woman named Emma Carter. Her life was simple but deeply rooted in the land she called home, a sprawling farm that had been in her family for over 100 years. The farm wasn't just property to Emma. It was a treasure trove of memories, stories, and hard work passed down through generations. From her grandmother's tales of milking cows at dawn, to her father teaching her how to plant rows of corn under the summer sun, every corner of the farm held meaning. It was more than a place. It was part of who she was. Every morning, Emma would wake up early, brew herself a cup of strong coffee, and sit on the porch overlooking the fields. She loved watching the sunrise paint the horizon orange and pink, casting long shadows across the land. Birds chirped noisily as they flitted between trees, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze provided a soothing soundtrack. Life here was peaceful, predictable even, and Emma cherished it. But little did she know, this tranquility was about to be shattered. One day, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway next door. Out stepped Sarah Langley, a strikingly confident woman dressed in designer clothes and heels that looked completely out of place on the dirt road. Sarah introduced herself with a polished smile, explaining that she had recently purchased the neighboring plot of land. At first, Emma thought nothing of it. New neighbors came and went, and most kept to themselves. But Sarah was different. She made it clear from the start that she wasn't interested in blending in or making friends. Instead, she seemed fixated on one thing: Emma's farm. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began visiting Emma frequently, always bringing up the same topic: money. "You could sell this land for a fortune," Sarah would say, leaning casually against Emma's fence like she owned the place already. "Developers are dying to get their hands on properties like yours. Think about it. You'd never have to worry about finances again." Each time, Emma politely declined, explaining that the farm wasn't for sale. To her, it wasn't about money. This land was her heritage, her sanctuary. No amount of wealth could replace what it meant to her. But Sarah didn't take no for an answer. When polite persuasion failed, she switched tactics. Rumors started spreading around town. Whispers that Emma's farm might be rezoned for commercial use, cutting off access to water sources. Workers hired to help during harvest season suddenly quit without explanation, muttering something about pressure when pressed for details. Even Emma's tractor broke down mysteriously one night, leaving her stranded miles away from home. Though she couldn't prove anything, Emma suspected Sarah's involvement in these incidents. The once friendly neighborhood now felt tense, and Emma found herself glancing nervously over her shoulder whenever she worked outside. Things escalated further when Emma noticed strange markings along the edge of her property line. Bright yellow flags stuck out awkwardly among the tall grass, accompanied by wooden stakes driven firmly into the ground. Confused, Emma walked over to investigate. That's when she realized what had happened. The boundary markers had been moved. Someone had deliberately shifted them, claiming a significant portion of her land as their own. Panic surged through her chest as she rushed back inside to call her lawyer. Sure enough, official-looking documents soon arrived in the mail, stating that Sarah Langley now legally owned part of Emma's cherished farm. Emma was furious, not just because of the blatant theft, but because of the audacity behind it. How dare someone try to steal something so precious? Sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the papers in disbelief, Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes. But then, something inside her shifted. Anger replaced despair, and determination took hold. She wouldn't let Sarah win. Not only would Emma fight to reclaim her land, but she would make sure Sarah regretted ever crossing her. Little did either woman know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would change both their lives forever. The days that followed were filled with sleepless nights and endless phone calls. Emma reached out to everyone she knew, seeking advice and support. One name kept coming up: Mark Reynolds, a lawyer known for taking on difficult cases involving property disputes. Desperate for help, Emma scheduled a meeting with him. Walking into his office for the first time, she felt a mix of hope and anxiety. Could he really help her win against someone like Sarah? Mark listened intently as Emma recounted everything that had happened. The stolen land, the rumors, the sabotage attempts. His expression remained calm, but his eyes narrowed slightly when she mentioned Sarah's aggressive behavior. "This isn't just about greed," he said finally, tapping his pen against the desk. "It's personal. And if we play our cards right, we can turn that against her." For the first time since the nightmare began, Emma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, justice was within reach. As Emma left Mark's office that afternoon, she glanced back at her farm from the car window. Despite everything, it still stood strong, resilient like the generations before her who had cared for it. Whatever lay ahead, she vowed to protect it, not just for herself, but for all those who had come before her. With newfound resolve burning in her heart, Emma prepared to face whatever challenges awaited her. After all, this wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a fight for truth, fairness, and the unbreakable bond between people and the land they love. The days following Emma's meeting with Mark Reynolds were a whirlwind of activity. Armed with determination and a plan, Emma threw herself into preparing for the legal battle ahead. Mark had warned her that this wouldn't be easy. Sarah Langley wasn't just any opponent. She was wealthy, well-connected, and ruthless in her pursuit of what she wanted. But Emma refused to back down. This wasn't just about reclaiming her land. It was about standing up for justice, integrity, and everything her family had worked so hard to build. Mark started by gathering every document related to the farm: deeds, surveys, tax records, and even old photographs showing the original boundary. Markers. He explained to Emma that proving ownership would require presenting an unbroken chain of evidence dating back decades. It was tedious work, sifting through dusty files and deciphering faded handwriting, but Emma didn't mind. Every piece of paper felt like a lifeline, connecting her to the past and strengthening her case. Late into the night, they sat side by side at Emma's kitchen table, poring over maps and making notes. The room smelled faintly of coffee and worn leather from the ancient documents they handled. While Emma focused on building her defense, Sarah wasted no time escalating her attacks. Her team of high-powered lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to delay the proceedings or have the case dismissed altogether. They claimed technicalities, argued jurisdiction issues, and even accused Emma of failing to maintain proper records. Baseless accusation meant to cast doubt on her credibility. Each new obstacle tested Emma's patience, but Mark reassured her. "This is classic intimidation," he said one evening, his voice calm yet firm. "She's trying to wear you out before we even get to court." But Sarah didn't stop there. As the weeks dragged on, strange things began happening around the farm. Anonymous letters appeared in Emma's mailbox, accusing her of neglecting the property and suggesting that someone more capable should take over. One letter even hinted that selling the land might be the only way to avoid financial ruin. At first, Emma tried to ignore them, but their constant arrival weighed heavily on her mind. Then came the vandalism. One morning, Emma discovered that several fence posts along the disputed boundary had been deliberately damaged, leaving her livestock wandering dangerously close to the road. Another time, tools stored in her barn went missing overnight, forcing her to spend precious hours searching for replacements. Despite these setbacks, Emma refused to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she channeled her frustration into action. With Mark's guidance, she reached out to local authorities, filing police reports and documenting every incident meticulously. She also began reaching out to neighbors who had witnessed Sarah's behavior firsthand. Many were hesitant to speak up, fearing retaliation, but a few brave souls agreed to testify if needed. Their courage gave Emma renewed strength, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Meanwhile, Mark continued, unraveling the tangled web of Sarah's schemes. During one particularly grueling research session, he stumbled upon something intriguing: a pattern. Several former landowners in nearby towns had fallen victim to similar tactics: pressure to sell, mysterious boundary disputes, and sudden legal challenges. Intrigued, Mark dug deeper, uncovering affidavits and testimonies from people who claimed Sarah had used forged documents and bribed officials to seize their properties. While none of these cases directly involved Emma, they painted a damning picture of Sarah's methods and motivations. Armed with this information, Mark devised a bold strategy. Rather than simply defending Emma's claim, they would go on the offensive, exposing Sarah's unethical practices to the court and ultimately the public. "If we can prove a pattern of fraud," Mark explained during one late-night brainstorming session, "we'll not only win your case but potentially shut her operation down for good." Emma nodded slowly, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about sending a message that greed and dishonesty wouldn't be tolerated. As preparations intensified, Emma found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since Sarah's arrival. What had once been a quiet, predictable existence was now consumed by meetings, phone calls, and endless stacks of paperwork. Yet amidst the chaos, she discovered inner reserves of resilience she never knew she possessed. Friends and acquaintances who had initially kept their distance now rallied around her, offering words of encouragement and practical support. A group of volunteers helped repair the damaged fence posts, while others organized fundraisers to help cover Emma's mounting legal fees. Even strangers from neighboring towns reached out, sharing stories of their own battles against developers like Sarah. One particularly memorable moment came when an elderly man named Harold visited Emma's farm. Harold had lived in the area his entire life and remembered Emma's grandparents fondly. Over cups of tea on the porch, he recounted how her grandfather had fought tirelessly to preserve the land during tough economic times. "Your family has always stood for what's right," Harold said, his eyes twinkling with pride. "And now it's your turn to carry that torch." His words resonated deeply with Emma, reinforcing her belief that this fight was bigger than herself. It was about honoring her ancestors' legacy. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. On sleepless nights, Emma would lie awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she was strong enough to see this through. The stress of the legal battle, combined with Sarah's relentless harassment, took its toll. Some mornings, she woke up feeling utterly exhausted, questioning whether it was worth it. But then she'd step outside, breathe in the fresh country air, and look out over the fields bathed in golden sunlight. In those quiet moments, surrounded by the beauty of the land she loved, her resolve hardened once again. By the time the preliminary hearings began, Emma felt as prepared as she could be. Sitting beside Mark in the courtroom, she clutched a folder, filled with years of painstakingly gathered evidence. Across the aisle, Sarah sat flanked by her team of polished attorneys, exuding confidence despite the growing cracks in her facade. As arguments unfolded, it became clear that this case wouldn't just hinge on technicalities or legal jargon. It was a clash of values, a battle between greed and integrity. Emma listened intently as Mark presented their case, laying out irrefutable proof of her rightful ownership. He highlighted inconsistencies in Sarah's claims, pointed out discrepancies in her forged documents, and introduced testimony from witnesses who had suffered similar injustices. When it was Sarah's lawyers' turn to speak, they launched into a barrage of accusations, attempting to discredit Emma and portray her as an outdated relic clinging to worthless farmland. But Emma remained composed, her gaze steady and unwavering as the hearing drew to a close. The judge announced that the full trial would commence in several months. For now, the disputed land would remain under Emma's control, a small but significant victory. Stepping out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, Emma allowed herself a brief moment of triumph. The road ahead was still long, and challenges undoubtedly awaited, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a stand for justice, fairness, and the enduring bond between people and the land they cherish. With each passing day, Emma grew stronger, more determined, and more hopeful. She knew the battle was far from over, but she also knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, she would face it head-on, armed with truth, courage, and the unwavering support of those who believed in her cause. As the weeks leading up to the trial passed, Emma and Mark intensified their efforts to build an airtight case against Sarah Langley. While the initial evidence they had gathered was strong, Mark knew that exposing Sarah's fraudulent behavior would require more than just proving Emma's ownership of the land. They needed to dig deeper, uncovering not only what Sarah had done but why she acted with such relentless determination. It was time to peel back the layers of Sarah's carefully constructed facade and reveal the truth beneath. One evening, as Emma and Mark sat at her kitchen table surrounded by piles of documents, Mark suggested a bold idea. If we can show that this isn't an isolated incident, that Sarah has a history of targeting vulnerable landowners, we'll have a much stronger case. Emma nodded thoughtfully, realizing the importance of painting a broader picture. If the court could see Sarah for who she truly was, a manipulative opportunist driven by greed, it might tip the scales decisively in their favor. But where to? Start? Their first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A retired surveyor named Walter Jenkins reached out after hearing about Emma's plight through the grapevine. Walter had worked in the area for decades and claimed he might have valuable information about Sarah's past dealings. Intrigued, Emma arranged to meet him at his modest home on the outskirts of town. Over cups of tea, Walter shared a chilling story. Years ago, he had been hired to verify boundary lines for a property dispute involving Sarah. At the time, something about her aggressive demeanor struck him as odd, but he dismissed it until later, when he overheard her arguing with another developer about falsifying records. Though he hadn't reported it at the time, fearing retaliation, Walter now regretted staying silent. He handed Emma copies of old maps and notes he'd kept from the project, which hinted at irregularities in Sarah's claims. Encouraged by this lead, Emma and Mark decided to investigate further. They began reaching out discreetly to other landowners who had crossed paths with Sarah. Many were hesitant to talk, understandably wary of stirring up trouble. But eventually, one name led to another, forming a network of individuals who had suffered under Sarah's schemes. One particularly damning account came from a farmer named Tom Harris, whose family had lost their ancestral home after Sarah allegedly bribed local officials to rezone the land for commercial development. Tom recounted how his elderly parents had been devastated, forced to leave the only place they'd ever known. His voice cracked with emotion as he described watching bulldozers tear down the house where he'd grown up. "I don't want anyone else to go through what we did," he told Emma, agreeing to provide a sworn affidavit detailing his experience. With each new piece of evidence, the puzzle became clearer. Sarah wasn't merely a savvy businesswoman. She was a calculated predator who preyed on those least able to defend themselves. Her tactics followed a familiar pattern: identify struggling landowners, apply relentless pressure to sell, and if they resisted, resort to intimidation, forgery, or legal manipulation. The more Emma learned, the angrier she became, but also the more resolute. This wasn't just about protecting her own farm anymore. It was about holding Sarah accountable for all the lives she had ruined. To gather even more ammunition for the trial, Emma enlisted the help of a private investigator recommended by Mark. The investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda, specialized in uncovering corporate misconduct. Within weeks, Linda unearthed a trove of incriminating documents hidden in public records and obscure filings. Among them were emails showing Sarah instructing her team to make examples of resistant landowners, internal memos outlining strategies to exploit zoning loopholes, and canceled checks linked to suspicious payments made to government employees. These discoveries painted a damning portrait of Sarah's operation, revealing a level of corruption far beyond what Emma had imagined. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when Linda stumbled upon an old newspaper article from Sarah's hometown. The headline read, "Farmer loses land due to debt crisis, family struggles to rebuild." The accompanying photo showed a young Sarah standing beside her father outside their foreclosed farm, faces etched with bitterness. As Emma read the article, pieces clicked into place. Sarah's obsession with acquiring vast tracts of land wasn't just about profit, it was deeply personal. Growing up, she had watched her family lose everything due to financial mismanagement, leaving her with a burning desire to reclaim what she saw as her birthright. Unfortunately, that drive had twisted into something toxic, a need to dominate others no matter the cost. Armed with this newfound understanding, Emma and Mark crafted a strategy designed to expose not only Sarah's actions, but also her motivations. By presenting her backstory alongside the evidence of her unethical practices, they hoped to humanize Emma's struggle while demonizing Sarah's greed. "We're not just fighting for your land," Mark explained during one late-night planning session. "We're telling a story, one that shows the court exactly who Sarah is and why her behavior must be stopped." In preparation for the trial, Emma spent countless hours rehearsing her testimony. She wanted to ensure that her words conveyed both the depth of her connection to the land and the pain of having it stolen from her. Mark coached her tirelessly, helping her anticipate cross-examination questions and stay composed under pressure. "Remember," he reminded her, "this isn't just about winning. It's about making sure everyone understands what's at stake here." As the trial date approached, Emma felt a mix of nerves and excitement. On one hand, she dreaded facing Sarah in court, knowing the battle would be fierce and emotionally draining. On the other hand, she couldn't wait to confront her adversary head-on, armed with the truth. For months, Sarah had operated in the shadows, relying on fear and secrecy to achieve her goals. Now it was time to bring her into the light. The final days before the trial were a blur of activity. Volunteers continued rallying around Emma, organizing fundraisers and spreading awareness about her case. Local media outlets picked up the story, drawing attention to Sarah's predatory practices and sparking outrage in the community. Neighbors who had once hesitated to get involved now openly supported Emma, attending rallies and signing petitions, demanding accountability. Even strangers from nearby towns joined the cause, sharing their own experiences with similar developers and vowing to stand with her. On the eve of the trial, Emma stood on her porch, gazing out at the fields bathed in moonlight. Despite the chaos of the past months, the land remained unchanged, a testament to its resilience and enduring beauty. She thought about all the people who had come together to support her: friends, neighbors, witnesses, investigators, and even strangers united by a shared sense of justice. This fight wasn't hers alone anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in fairness and integrity. Taking a deep breath, Emma whispered a quiet promise to herself and to the land she loved. No matter what happened in court tomorrow, she would give it her all. She owed it to her ancestors, to her community, and to future generations who deserved to inherit a world built on honesty and respect. With renewed determination burning in her heart, Emma stepped back inside, ready to face whatever challenges awaited her. The stage was set, and the truth was on her side. The day of the trial arrived, and the small-town courthouse buzzed with anticipation. News of Emma Carter's battle against Sarah Langley had spread far beyond the local community, drawing attention from neighboring towns and even regional media outlets. Dozens of people packed into the courtroom: friends, neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the showdown between two women whose lives had become inextricably intertwined. The air was thick with tension as Emma walked through the heavy wooden doors, her head held high despite the weight of what lay ahead. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table alongside Mark Reynolds, her lawyer, who exuded calm confidence. Across the aisle, Sarah Langley sat flanked by her team of polished attorneys, their expensive suits and sharp demeanors making them look like predators circling their prey. Sarah herself appeared composed, though her clenched jaw and darting eyes betrayed hints of unease. As the judge entered the room and called the court to order, a hush fell over the crowd. This was it, the moment when months of preparation would finally come to fruition. Mark opened the proceedings with a compelling opening statement. His voice steady and clear, he painted a vivid picture of Emma's deep connection to the land and the injustice she had endured. "This case isn't just about property lines or legal technicalities," he said, gesturing toward Emma. "It's about protecting the values that bind us: honesty, integrity, and respect for hard work. Sarah Langley has built her empire, not through fairness but through deceit, intimidation, and exploitation. Today we will prove that beyond any doubt." Sarah's lead attorney countered with a slick rebuttal, portraying Emma as an outdated farmer clinging to useless land while Sarah sought to bring progress and prosperity to the area. He spoke of luxury housing developments, job creation, and economic growth, attempting to frame the dispute as a clash between tradition and modernity. But his words rang hollow in the crowded courtroom, where many attendees knew firsthand how ruthless Sarah could be. As the trial unfolded, both sides presented their evidence. Emma's team meticulously laid out decades of documents proving her family's ownership of the farm, worn deeds, faded maps, and tax records stretching back generations. Mark highlighted every inconsistency in Sarah's claims, pointing out forged signatures, altered boundary markers, and falsified surveys. Each revelation drew murmurs of disbelief from the audience, further eroding Sarah's credibility. But the turning point came when Emma took the stand. Dressed simply yet elegantly, she carried herself with quiet dignity as she recounted her story. She spoke of growing up on the farm, learning its rhythms and secrets from her parents and grandparents. Her voice trembled slightly as she described the heartbreak of discovering Sarah's fraudulent documents and realizing that someone had deliberately stolen part of her land. "This farm isn't just dirt and crops," she said, looking directly at the jury. "It's my home, my history, my future. It's everything I am." Then, under Mark's guidance, Emma revealed the broader pattern of Sarah's misconduct. She shared stories from other victims: farmers forced off their land, families torn apart by financial ruin, all connected by Sarah's greed. When she mentioned Tom Harris, whose elderly parents had been evicted from their ancestral home, tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm not fighting just for myself," she continued. "I'm fighting for everyone who's ever been bullied or cheated out of what's rightfully theirs." The courtroom was silent as Emma finished speaking, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. Even Sarah seemed momentarily shaken, fidgeting uncomfortably in her seat. For the first time, the facade of invincibility she had so carefully maintained began to crack. Mark didn't stop there. He called several witnesses to testify, including Walter Jenkins, the retired surveyor, and Linda, the private investigator. Walter explained how he had witnessed suspicious activity during a previous project involving Sarah, while Linda detailed her findings, presenting emails, canceled checks, and internal memos that exposed Sarah's corrupt practices. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the damning narrative unfolding before the court. When it was Sarah's turn to present her defense, her lawyers struggled to counter the mounting proof against her. They attempted to discredit Emma's witnesses, accusing them of bias or exaggeration, but their arguments lacked substance. One particularly awkward moment occurred when Sarah herself took the stand. Under cross-examination by Mark, she grew visibly flustered, stumbling over answers and contradicting earlier statements. When asked about the newspaper article detailing her family's loss of their farm, she snapped defensively, "That has nothing to do with this case." Her outburst only reinforced the impression of someone desperate to hide the truth. Throughout the trial, Emma remained focused and composed, leaning on Mark's expertise and the unwavering support of those around her. Outside the courtroom, volunteers kept spirits high, organizing meals and offering words of encouragement. Neighbors brought fresh flowers to decorate the porch of Emma's farmhouse, symbolizing their solidarity. Even strangers sent letters and messages of support, inspired by her courage. By the final day of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Both sides delivered closing arguments, summarizing their cases one last time. Mark's speech was passionate and powerful, urging the jury to see the bigger picture. "This isn't just about a piece of land," he concluded. "It's about justice, about standing up to bullies who think they can take whatever they want without consequences. Let today be the day we say enough is enough." Sarah's attorney tried to salvage their position with flowery language about innovation and opportunity, but his words felt hollow compared to the raw emotion and undeniable evidence presented by Emma's side. As the judge instructed the jury to begin deliberations, Emma allowed herself a brief moment of hope. She had done everything she could. Now it was out of her hands. Waiting for the verdict was agonizing. Hours stretched into what felt like days as Emma paced nervously outside the courtroom, surrounded by friends and supporters. Finally, the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a decision. As Emma re-entered the room and took her seat, her Heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The foreman stood and read the verdict. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Emma Carter." Cheers erupted from the gallery and tears streamed down Emma's face as relief washed over her. Not only had the court ruled in her favor, declaring her the rightful owner of the disputed land, but they also ordered Sarah to pay substantial damages for her fraudulent actions. Sarah slumped in her chair, her smug demeanor replaced by shock and humiliation, as court officers escorted her out amidst flashes of cameras and jeers from the crowd. It was clear that her reign of manipulation had come to an end. Justice had prevailed, not just for Emma but for everyone who had suffered because of Sarah's greed. For Emma, the victory was bittersweet. The battle had taken its toll emotionally, physically, and financially. Yet as she stepped outside into the warm sunlight, surrounded by cheering neighbors and well-wishers, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. This wasn't just her triumph. It was a collective victory for anyone who believed in doing what was right, no matter the odds. And as she looked out over her beloved farm, she knew the fight had been worth it. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause as the judge's gavel struck the final blow, sealing Sarah Langley's fate. The verdict was clear: Emma Carter had won. Not only did the court rule in her favor, affirming her rightful ownership of the disputed land, but it also ordered Sarah to pay significant damages for her fraudulent actions. For Emma, this moment was more than a legal victory. It was vindication, closure, and a testament to the power of standing up against injustice. As she stood there, surrounded by friends, family, and supporters, tears streamed down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of relief, pride, and gratitude. Sarah, on the other hand, looked like a shadow of her former self. Gone was the confident, polished woman who had strutted into town months earlier, convinced that money and influence could buy her anything she wanted. Now, she sat slumped in her chair, her face pale and her eyes wide with disbelief. Her lawyers whispered urgently, trying to console her, but it was no use. The weight of the verdict crushed her, and as court officers escorted her out of the room, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, she kept her head bowed, unable to meet anyone's gaze. It was a stark reminder that no amount of wealth or cunning could protect someone from the consequences of their actions. In the days that followed, news of the trial spread far and wide. Local newspapers ran front-page stories celebrating Emma's triumph, while national outlets picked up the tale, framing it as an inspiring David versus Goliath battle. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Justice for Emma and Stand with Farmers as people across the country rallied behind her cause. Messages of support poured in from all corners, from farmers sharing similar struggles to urban dwellers who admired her courage. Even strangers stopped by her farm to shake her hand or leave notes of encouragement on her gate. But despite the outpouring of love and admiration, Emma knew the fight wasn't truly over yet. Winning the case had been a monumental achievement, but the scars of the battle lingered. Financially, she was still recovering from the costs of the lawsuit, even though the damages awarded would help ease the burden. Emotionally, the stress and fear of the past months weighed heavily on her. There were nights when she lay awake, replaying the trial in her mind, wondering if she'd made the right decision to pursue justice at such great personal cost. Yet every morning, as the sun rose over her fields and bathed the land in golden light, she reminded herself why she had fought so hard. This place, the soil beneath her feet, the rustling leaves, the endless skies, was worth every sacrifice. One of the most unexpected blessings of the trial was the renewed sense of community it had sparked. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now visited regularly, bringing food, offering help, and simply sitting with Emma to share stories and laughter. People who had doubted her ability to stand up to someone like Sarah now regarded her with newfound respect. "You're our hero," one elderly neighbor told her during a casual visit. "You showed us that we don't have to roll over just because someone bigger comes along." Inspired by the support she received, Emma decided to turn her experience into something positive for others. She began hosting gatherings at her farm, inviting local farmers, activists, and legal experts to discuss ways to protect rural communities from predatory developers. Together, they brainstormed strategies for raising awareness, advocating for stronger property rights laws, and supporting victims of similar schemes. What started as a small initiative quickly grew into a grassroots movement, drawing participants from neighboring towns and beyond. Emma realized that her fight hadn't just been about saving her own land. It had ignited a larger conversation about fairness, integrity, and the importance of preserving the ties between people and the land they cherished. Meanwhile, Sarah Langley disappeared from public view almost immediately after the trial. Rumors swirled about her financial ruin, as the hefty damages and legal fees drained her resources. Investigations launched by local authorities uncovered further evidence of her unethical practices, leading to lawsuits from other victims seeking restitution. One by one, her business ventures collapsed under the weight of scandal and scrutiny. By the time winter arrived, Sarah was little more than a cautionary tale, a reminder that greed and dishonesty always came with a price. For Emma, life slowly returned to normal, or at least, a new kind of normal. She continued working the land, planting crops, tending animals, and watching the seasons change. But there was a difference now. Where once she had felt isolated and vulnerable, she now felt empowered and connected. The farm wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had rallied around her, fought alongside her, and believed in her cause. Every sunrise seemed brighter, every breeze carried hope, and every step on the soil felt lighter. On the anniversary of the trial's conclusion, Emma organized a celebration at her farm. Friends, neighbors, and supporters gathered under a canopy of twinkling lights strung between trees, sharing food, music, and laughter. A bonfire crackled in the center of the yard, casting warm shadows across smiling faces. As Emma stood before the crowd holding a microphone in trembling hands, she reflected on how far she had come. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "When this whole nightmare started, I felt powerless, scared, and alone. But then something incredible happened. You showed up. You showed me that I wasn't fighting by myself. You reminded me that the things we hold dear, our homes, our families, our values, are worth protecting no matter the cost." She paused, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. "This victory isn't mine alone. It belongs to all of us, to everyone who believes in doing what's right, even when it's hard, and to everyone who knows that justice is worth fighting for." The crowd erupted in applause, cheering and whistling as Emma stepped down from the makeshift stage. As the night wore on, she found herself surrounded by hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt words of gratitude. People thanked her not just for reclaiming her land, but for giving them hope, for proving that ordinary people could stand up to extraordinary challenges and win. As the festivities wound down and the last guests departed, Emma walked back to her porch, where a single lantern cast a soft glow over the quiet farm. She sat down in her favorite rocking chair, pulling a blanket around her shoulders to ward off the evening chill. Above her, the stars shimmered brightly, untouchable yet constant, much like the land she loved. For the first time in months, she felt truly at peace. In the weeks and months that followed, Emma dedicated herself to ensuring that her story didn't fade into obscurity. She wrote articles for agricultural magazines, gave interviews to journalists, and even started a blog chronicling her journey. Her message was simple but powerful. Never underestimate the strength of your roots. Whether addressing a room full of activists or chatting with a curious visitor, she emphasized the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity and refusing to let fear dictate your choices. Years later, the farm remained a symbol of resilience and unity. Visitors often stopped by to see the boundary markers that had once sparked such controversy, now firmly planted and reinforced with plaques commemorating the historic trial. Children played in the fields, laughing and chasing each other, blissfully, unaware of the battles waged to preserve the land beneath their feet. And Emma, now older but no less determined, continued living her life with purpose and passion. Looking back, she realized that the trial had changed her in ways she never expected. It had taught her the value of perseverance, the power of community, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Most importantly, it had shown her that sometimes the greatest victories aren't measured in acres or dollars, but in the hearts and minds of those who believe in doing what's right. And so, as she watched another sunset paint the horizon in hues of orange and pink, Emma smiled. The land was safe, her legacy was secure, and somewhere deep inside, she knew her ancestors were smiling too.